Chapter 12. Ben stood stark naked with a janky crown made from twigs, moss, and a slightly shiny pebble proudly on his head. His stance was wide, his wings were bright pink and purple, and his bare ass was a little cold. He had his knuckles pressed against his hips, his elbows a near-perfect 90 degrees. He stood just slightly leaned back, looking into the large circular tunnel that had been chewed through the dense, broccoli-like foliage that helped form the insulating layer between the forest and the sky. It was, in many ways, easy to compare the top layer of this weird, magical forest to the ground. It was, Ben thought, a bit like the top layer of a deep underground cavern, in that it was just as easy to dig in and build a burrow into the ceiling as it was the floor. The glowing broccoli trees portion of the ceiling was particularly dense, a solid mass, much like the top of the broccoli vegetable. Really, it was solid, and thus the perfect place to burrow into and make a home. The tunnel Ben was looking at was much larger than he was, and lined all around with some sort of silky web. It didn't look like a spider's web. It was thick, white, and shiny, like when certain kinds of adhesives are pulled apart and form those really dense filaments before snapping into thin little hairs. It was layered in a clockwise spiral all the way around the tunnel, which turned a sharp 90 degrees to the right out of view after it went in a foot or two. Ben measured the distance again with his eyes and then made a disgusted noise. He honestly had no idea how to accurately eyeball exact sizes anymore. His proportions were all wrong, and he mourned the fact that he didn't have a ruler to figure out his exact dimensions. It was common practice among masters in the construction business to get the exact measurements of their hands memorized, as it gave them a reliable metric to measure against that was always on hand, pardon the pun. Ben was not a master in construction. He was just a construction laborer for the city. He had measured his hands, though, after hearing about that particular rumor. It was probably a completely made-up rumor, but it sounded cool, so Ben had just gone with it. He knew his own hands very well, and he was pissed to see that their proportions had changed slightly. Really, his whole body was just a little off, and it was bothering him, like an off-tilt painting in the hallway of a friend's house. "Stalling, stalling, stalling," Ben said quietly to himself, tapping his foot on the branch he was standing on. If there was a giant spider in that little lair, Ben was going to freak the fuck out, nope the fuck out, and snap his crown in half. He already didn't like the fuckers when they were 1/1,000,000th of his size. 3 times Ben's size was a bad fucking equation, and he didn't want to play games with a spider that looked like it was the size of a fucking Hummer. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "I can lure it out." Ben rose from the branch and carefully positioned himself so he was out of jumping range. Or so he hoped. At a minimum, the spider would have to take a second or two to get into position, and Ben could use that time to run away. "Just gotta tweak the web a bit. I'm perfectly safe," he claimed, and then opened a utility pocket and shot a couple of pebbles into the lair's open mouth. Ben's whole body was tense. His eyes tracked the quick rocks, a quick right-to-left movement, and watched as they impacted against the weird-looking webbing. The web turned to slime, like how a banana looks soft and dry until something gouges it, and then it's just slimy. That's what happened when the rocks hit, and they slid forward, then slid out, falling through the air to the ground, leaving a perfect record of their path behind them in the tunnel. The path the rocks took was shiny and smooth, and seemed to have the consistency of rubber, which made the banana analogy above only about 40% accurate. Ben waited, but nothing emerged. He knew something was inside there, but he didn't know what. He sniffed, scrunching his nose. "Welp," he said, then floated towards the mouth of the tunnel. He ran a hand across the knot web and marveled at how it instantly collapsed at the slightest pressure and formed a super slick layer in its wake. It was like industrially smooth, the kind of thing that needed to be engineered in a lab. Weirdly enough, it left no residue on his hand when he touched it. It basically formed a thick, tough, super smooth layer, and functioned the exact opposite as spiderweb, in that it would prevent anything from getting in rather than preventing anything from getting out. Ben looked around, his eyebrows raised. To the right, nothing but branches and trees. To the left, the same as the right. "Can I steal this?" Ben asked aloud, then formed a utility pocket to find out the answer. He could not steal the already collapsed portions of the weird substance. It was bonded to the tree and he couldn't get an edge under it. But he could steal the web-looking stuff just fine. It was a pain, and it required both concentration and finesse. He had to almost grab the substance strand by strand, gently breaking the thread with a very, very light suction effect, and then catching it as it fell. In the beginning, he failed more than he succeeded, and he was sure this was a colossal waste of time. But he had nothing, and this was something. He pursued the human passion of procrastinating away an unpleasant task and did his species proud. As time went on, either Ben or the utility pocket became more and more skilled at the task. By the time 2 hours had passed, Ben had reached the point of being very good at removing the weird slime without rendering it useless. He began working his way in the tunnel, stripping the walls bare as he did so. "I love this utility pouch," Ben said, then stopped his rampant thievery as he got close to the bend in the tunnel. Better go meet the neighbor, Ben thought, and carefully floated up and through. The tunnel continued on for a little while after that, then turned again, leading higher, then repeated the pattern one more time. Ben emerged into a large circular chamber which lacked the slime web that lined the entrance. 2 more tunnels went off from it, and they too were free of the slime web. Music started playing, like something he would have heard while playing an old Nintendo game. Words echoed in his mind as soon as the music started. "Plus player announcement. You have entered the lair of the Aeon Slug. This is a lair-type dungeon. One-time plus player tooltip. Lair-type dungeons differ from core-type dungeons in that they are the lair of a powerful creature, rather than the creation of a dungeon core. Unlike a core dungeon, the law of proportional risk for proportional reward does not apply. A lair does not regenerate monsters, nor does it regenerate rewards, and can only be raided once. This is literally the home of a powerful creature. Be advised, this dungeon contains a reliquary. One-time plus player tooltip. Reliquaries differ from standard treasure rooms in that they typically contain one unique item which exists outside the class and level system. They are never unguarded, regardless of appearances. The usefulness of the items will vary, but each one is, no doubt about it, a genuine relic." Well, that was something all right. Ben had been expecting a giant spider, but he was in a video game-style world, so he probably should have expected this instead. Mentally, Ben changed hats, sitting down and examining the area closely. He'd played video games before, he knew what to expect, but he couldn't ever have claimed to be good at video games. Ben liked to think he could have been good at video games if he'd applied himself, but never had the heart to put forth the effort into something so pointless. Instead, he'd studied road maintenance at the MUTCD, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, to get a promotion at work. Ben rolled his eyes. Shows what he knew about what he should have been studying. No doubt about it, this place really was a dungeon. Little bright green orbs of light were set to either side of the tunnels leading out of the main room, and Ben got the distinct feeling there were monsters laying in wait for him no matter which way he went. "I need to get my head on straight," Ben said, feeling whatever weird compulsions that had overtaken him completely recede as the adrenaline kicked in, making his mind lucid. The urge, the need to close his eyes and drift off for just a second seemed to scream at him in his more sober state. So he crossed his legs and shut his eyes, doing his best to let himself drift off, even for a second. System update! You have destroyed a high-grade town crystal. You have been issued the reward of 1 perk lottery ticket. Redeem this ticket during any system update. You have run from a battle you started. You have gained the passive skill Tactical Withdrawal. You have gained the class Prince. You have advanced to level 1. Skills gained: Royal Restrictions, Crown Craft, Short Sword Proficiency Basic, Annex. You have advanced to level 2. Skills gained: Secret Sense Royal Looter. Ben opened his eyes, then looked around to make sure nothing had come to get him. He got the oddest feeling that there were rules in these dungeons, and that the entry room was safe. He shut his eyes again, eager to redeem his reward for destroying the town crystal. System update! You are redeeming ×1 perk lottery ticket. You will be given between 1 and 3 choices. Rolling 3. Rolling for number of perks revealed, 1. Ring of Sacrifice bonus activated, 3. You have 3 perks to choose from, and none of them are hidden. Please note that you must choose a perk. Jaw Dropper. This is a common body perk. Allows you to open your mouth exceptionally wide. Disgust your friends and enemies alike. Warning, does not allow your throat to open exceptionally wide. Key Keeper. This is a rare dungeon perk. When using a small key, there's a chance it won't break. Hope you like being the most popular guy in any party. Mind Horror. This is an uncommon mind perk. A mind horror haunts you and occasionally haunts your enemies too. Don't worry, it's not really chewing on your brain. It's just making you think it is. Ben chose Key Keeper and mentally resolved to learn more about the perk lottery system. He shuddered to think of what would happen if he landed on 3 options like mind horror. He opened his eyes and began stretching his body, talking quietly to himself. Small keys. Hope it's a good one. Really my only choice, considering the other 2 options. Mind horror. What the fuck, system? That's going in my angry letter for sure. He reached down and touched his toes, then started stretching his thighs and groin. Don't even know why I'm stretching my legs. I can fly, Ben said, still stretching his legs. Just habit. Who was it that told me habit was the most powerful force in the universe? Can't remember, Ben said, stretching his core by twisting and leaning his body around in various ways. But it sounds smart. Not true. I'm pretty sure the most powerful force in the universe is magnetism. Hell, according to that crazy guy on YouTube, magnetism is the only force in the universe. Ben started rolling his arms, then stretching his biceps and triceps, forearms and fingers. Pretty sure that guy had autism. He was like obsessed with magnets. Smart dude, Ben said, rolling his neck, then stretching his facial muscles, probably just to stall for a few extra seconds. I'm not a smart dude, Ben said, jogging in place and shaking his body out. I'm just a guy who likes to read fantasy books and digs holes for a living. I'm pretty sure my utility pocket is smarter than I am. Ben had a light layer of perspiration on him when he was finished, and he started to breathe, taking deep breaths, oxygenating his blood as best he could. Still, he said, I'm going to clear this dungeon, steal everything that can physically be stolen, find some clothes, and then move on to the next squatter and kick them out too. Ben knew he was the invader here, but it was more fun to think of himself as someone reclaiming something that was already his. Normally, that sort of lie was difficult to sustain, but with a crown on his head, it stopped being a lie and became a royal truth. So much of human history suddenly made sense. I really have lost my frickin' mind, Ben said, a big smile on his face, not bothering to mourn the loss of his sanity. Besides, when was the last time anyone met a sane royal? Left or right, enough screwing around, Ben said, looking at his 2 options. Now that he was sure this wasn't the den of a giant trapdoor spider, he found himself able to think things like, "Retreat isn't an option, the only way out is through," and "I'll either clear this dungeon or die trying." Left or right. A thick, clearly magical darkness obscured the path either way. Ben stopped himself, feeling a well-founded and deep-set paranoia about wishing for things, after the things he'd learned talking with the system. "Golly, I really want a cigarette right now," Ben continued, feeling really lame. "Don't be a pussy. Come on, Ben," Ben said to himself, then started moving towards the leftward way out. The darkness persisted like a curtain until Ben pressed through it, which was entirely without sensation, and he continued down a short corridor that exited into another spherical room with a flat floor. It had the look of a scene, like something that had been laid out specifically to be seen. There were 2 lit fires coming from 2 waist-high square pillars set apart from each other in the center of the room. The fire was bright green. Resting against the pillars were 2 skeletons dressed in rusty armor, with fossilized fairy wings on their backs. One had a rusty sword, and the other had a spear. The way forward was another tunnel across from the one Ben was in. The moment he stepped into the room, bright white fog covered the exits, and at the same time, the green fire rushed into the 2 skeletons. They rose silently. In their eye sockets, tiny little green flames danced with malevolence. The one with the sword started to crouch low, walking towards Ben, and the one with the spear jumped into the air and then flew at him, spear forward. Shit!" Ben said, quickly blasting the spear skeleton away with air through a utility pocket and keeping his back against the outer wall, circling away from the one with the sword. The spear-wielding skeleton flew backwards and hit the wall with the sound of snapping bone, but got back up and started running at Ben. The one with the sword abandoned caution and started running as well. Ben yelled in fear, opened a utility pocket on his palm, and began to shoot rocks at the skeletons, aiming for their heads. He felt it in his mana pool because he was pushing the utility pocket to blast out rocks as hard as he'd ever blasted out anything before. The skeletons, who had once been fairies, were not particularly sturdy, and the barrage snapped them to pieces. The bones, no longer animated, fell into a pile of delicate white splinters, and the green fire returned to its resting place. Ben was breathing hard, his heart pounding. He peeked out from behind his hand, eyes wide, and movements jerky like a bird. The white fog lifted from the exits, and a silver key appeared between the 2 green fire pillars. "I won?" Ben asked, then lowered his arm, the utility pocket still attached to his palm. He made a second one on his other hand, because that was honestly the best weapon he had right now, and walked towards the destroyed monsters. Ben kicked the pile of bones and ruined armor, then picked up the very rusty short sword. He felt knowledge from short sword proficiency, basic, and knew the sword was completely useless. It was 1 fight away from snapping in any number of places, and dull besides. Ben opened a utility pocket and scooped up all the bone fragments, the useless armor, spear, and sword. He was pleased to find that at his new size, and because of him being magical, he would have to work for a long time to reach the limit of how much he could hold in the utility pocket. Ben headed between the 2 green flames and picked up the small silver key. It shone with a mirror finish and had the design of a very detailed eye on its handle. With a shrug, Ben stowed that away in the utility pocket as well. The green, bright fires to his left and right caught the attention of his avarice, and he got close to see if there was anything he could do about them. Tiny, shiny, clear green pieces of glass were at the bottom of the fire. Ben opened a utility pocket under them. They dropped right in, and the green fire vanished. He repeated the process with the other flame pillar, and that fire vanished too. Ben then opened a small utility pocket in front of him and dropped a single one of the glass beads on the ground in front of him. It was not on fire, nor was it even warm to the touch. Ben put a pile of them back where he had taken them from, but they did not reignite. "I'm not sad," Ben said, then swapped the shitty pebble on his crown out with the shiniest and most impressive of the glass gems he'd just looted. Crown craft truly was magic, because there was no way it should have been as easy as it had been. Oddly enough, Ben actually felt a noticeable difference in his power the moment his crown had been upgraded. "That's cool. Crowns are awesome," he said, a small smile on his face. He took a few moments to start sorting out the pile of bone fragments mentally, the same way he'd once sorted out a pile of sand. It was much easier this time around, and when he was done, he had a pile of whole bones, a pile of useless metal armor, and a bunch of sharp fragments he could blast out like shrapnel. Respect the utility pocket, Ben thought to himself, wondering again if the thing was intelligent, and if there was anything nice he could do for it, because right now it was his only friend in the world. "Damn it, Short Bus," Ben said, feeling miserable for just a moment before pushing the feelings away. He continued forward, pushing through the magical darkness and floating his way through the next corridor, one of his arms already extended and ready to kill everything on sight. The next room, however, had no enemies. What it had instead were 3 levers, 2 exits, and some pictures on the walls. Cautiously, Ben passed through the threshold, and immediately all the exits fogged over once again. At the top of the room, a bright ball of orange energy appeared with a simple, evil, laughing face, like it was drawn out of jagged bolts of lightning. It gave a little scream, like steam from a kettle, and started to move. Ben felt a jolt of adrenaline spike in his blood, and he prepared for battle. "Whap!" Ben said, trying again unsuccessfully to catch the highly amusing monster ball of energy. It followed a predictable clockwise pattern and seemed bound to roll along surfaces rather than floating about in the air. "Whap!" Ben sounded out, opening another utility pocket in the path of the creature, and watched as it passed through the black portal with purple tentacle edges. Ben had really wanted to be able to throw the monster at other monsters, but alas, the utility pouch seemed to be unable to store pure energy. "Idea," Ben said, taking a few moments to get out of the monster's highly predictable path, then opened 2 linked utility pockets, one which the monster would collide with, and one which was floating in space in the middle of the room. "Schwink!" Ben said, and this time the monster was taken in by the utility pouch and deposited in the open air. Its evil little face twisted to an expression of panic. Then the monster collapsed in on itself, and a hard yellow gemstone fell towards the ground. It never hit. Ben went schwink and deftly caught the gem with a portal. Ben discovered the portal did conserve momentum, and spent a couple of seconds juggling the gemstones around with portals. "Ha-ha!" Ben said, looking like a complete idiot, opening and closing linked utility portals at angles and playing a very hectic game of Juggle the Monster Rock. He only stopped when he felt his mana pool begin to burn, much like a muscle would when it was being exerted too hard. Ben had been running, sometimes floating, around the room hard and fast, playing his stupid little game. He would, if anyone had bothered to make fun of him for what he'd just done, point out that his life was extremely stressful and that he'd like to challenge anyone else to come up with a better and more positive way to blow off some steam, thank you very much. Ben held the little yellow gem in his palm, eyeing it, judging if it would be better than the green glass he had on his crown currently. Then had a great idea. He pulled out a backup crown, ripped the moss off, and then lined the twig with the green glass before adding the single yellow gem so it would sit prominently on his forehead. He put his new crown on, and yes, he wasn't imagining it, he was even more powerful than he had been before. It wasn't something he could measure, but it was something he could feel, in the same way he could feel his skills and his level. "I'm so glad I don't have a mirror," Ben said aloud, then blinked a couple of times and remembered he was in a dungeon and that this room was supposed to have a puzzle in it. 3 levers, 1 door out, and pictures on the wall. Ben glanced at the pictures and was able to determine in about 5 seconds what he already knew. He was terrible at puzzles. Ben pulled the middle lever and nothing happened. He put the middle one back, then pulled the right-hand one. Nothing. Ben started going through the try every possible combination technique that had served lazy gamers well since the invention of the puzzle. The solution had been to pull the middle lever, then the left lever, then reset the middle, then pull the right, then pull the middle. Or something like that. The moment Ben realized there would be no punishment for getting the lever combo wrong, he'd spaced out and just started trying things at complete random. "I'm really good at adventuring," Ben commented to himself, watching the path forward open. He secured his crown, stretched a little more, then started trying to see if there was a way to steal the levers. There might have been, if he'd had more tools. Note to self, fill the utility pouch with a full tool set. There was nothing else in the room. So far, this dungeon had been surprisingly Spartan with its decoration. The pictures on the wall, which explained in a really esoteric way how to open the door, were painted on. Ben floated up and started scraping the paint, catching the flakes with the pouch. It was shocking to him how easy it was to procrastinate by stealing things. He'd never stolen anything in his old life, with the exception of a single bazooka bubblegum piece from a gas station on a road trip. His dad had found out, of course, when he saw Ben chewing it. He'd turned the car around, made Ben apologize to the attendant, pay for his stolen goods, then spanked his ass hard when they'd gotten home. "Stealing things is chicken noodle soup for the soul," Ben said, nodding and agreeing with himself as he said it. Part of the reason he'd taken the utility pouch in the first place was its ability to allow him to pilfer anything and everything. He'd always appreciated doing that sort of thing in video games, and considered it a winner's mindset. He was sad that he couldn't fill the pouch up with, say, fire and lightning, but he was still very happy with his choice. It had already saved his life many times over, and he'd barely scratched the surface of what it was capable of. The system had been right when he'd covertly called it the ultimate tool. "It's not a weapon, or at least that's not where it shines," the system had said, sounding excited. "I didn't design it to replace a sword, a shield, and a suit of armor. I designed it to replace everything else. And it's a little bit of my pet project. The other plus perks were labors of love, but when they were done, you know. The pocket, I still tinker with it, adding new features, increasing its functionality. I'm a bit of a snob when it comes to private dimensions," he'd said. Then gestured to the pocket dimension he lived in, as you can probably tell. The fairy bones Ben was using to scrape paint off a wooden wall were dry and brittle, and though he reduced a good number of them to shrapnel, he got all the paint chips. Ben examined the room, proud to see it completely empty. He mentally started concocting how to reuse the paint and make a better crown with it. "God almighty, this prince class is really affecting my mental state," Ben said, then slapped himself a few times to try and dispel the obsession with a better crown. Ben exited the lever room and floated through the next hallway. Utility pouches affixed to his palms, eyes sharp and ready to see combat. The next room did not disappoint him. A snail larger than he was rested in the center of the room, its eye stalks retracted and a bunch of crates? Yes, they were crates that looked to be made out of broccoli wood. The crates were lined up in 2 rows of 4 against the wall to his right, and another cluster of 8 were set to the wall to his left. Predictably, the exit to the room was across from him, and the snail was between him and it. The tunnels sealed themselves, the lights in the room dimmed, and the shell of the snail began to glow with green light. Its fleshy foot extended out, and its long eye stalks followed. Its eyes were just large black dots, like someone had injected a bit of ink in there, but Ben could tell they worked just fine. It began to spit angry bubbles, frothing from what Ben assumed was its mouth, and the eye stalks began to glow a bright green before a ball of fire formed between them and shot at Ben. He'd entered the room ready for a fight, and that meant he'd been ready to dodge. The fire burst against the wet green wood with a sizzle, and another followed after it, then another, then another. Ben quickly circled the room, and the snail struggled to turn fast enough to keep facing him. "Right," Ben said, walking and keeping himself positioned behind the slow snail. The first thing he did was shoot a barrage of rocks at the shell, and they cracked against it in a promising way, but didn't deliver any real results. The angry bubbling intensified, and the snail began to turn faster, at what likely felt like a breakneck speed to it. It still wasn't very fast, and Ben easily kept its back to him. "Saltwater," he mused, and opened a utility pocket above it and dumped some ocean water on the monster. The angry, bubbling noise turned even angrier, and the salty water seemed to irritate it, but it also lubricated the floor a little and let it turn even faster. Now Ben had to keep up a brisk walk to keep behind the shelled monstrosity. "Shelled monstrosity," Ben said, chiding himself. That's really an over-exaggeration. He had a bit of salt, collected when he'd been sifting through sand with his utility pocket, but he didn't really want to use it, mostly because he wanted to use it for his food. "Whap," Ben said, pretending it was a real skill, and stole a crate from across the room. "I cast Schwink," Ben said, then launched it at the snail, expending a real chunk of mana to give the heavy crate some extra oomph. It smashed against the snail's shell and broke to pieces, but visibly cracked the protective armor. It also scattered a couple of small, really standard-looking white crystals on the ground. "Oh," Ben said, the corners of his lips downturned, eyebrows raised and slightly together, eyes wide open and head nodding. "Okay, that works," he said, then shot crates at the snail till it stopped moving. 6 in total. Then Ben stowed the remaining 10 crates away in his utility pocket and went to examine the damage. The snail was dead, no question about that. Several of the small white crystals were on the ground, and the moment Ben's finger touched one, it vanished, and he felt a system prompt appear in his mind, one which he would be able to review when he took his next rest. The crystals had a little symbol on them, and they looked like money. Ben picked them all up. Then he picked up all the wood fragments, and while he was clearing the debris, he saw a little paper heart floating on the ground, resting on its point. When Ben touched it, it vanished, and he felt his body heal a little bit. Sure, I'll just take that," he said, and continued his looting. Then, for good measure, he stowed the snail's corpse away, too. "This dungeon is easy," Ben said, a confident, smug smile on his face. He entered the tunnel to go to the next room, enjoying the constant, looping music that had been playing. The next room was dark until Ben stepped foot into it, and when the lights came on, the music changed, increasing in tempo and drama. An armored, upright, Hercules-style beetle waited in the room. It was 3 times Ben's size, and held a huge steel axe. Its chitin was a solid, shiny black, and looked thick like armor. It stood like a minotaur, with a thick, solid body and projected pure confidence. The exits to the room sealed themselves, and the mini-boss attacked. His name didn't matter because he gave it up. What mattered was what he was going to do. He had chosen the consuming fire, and only had a year to live before he burned out. The system, that devil, had dangled the plus perk in front of him and told him only those who chose it would be told the truth. The whole truth about what happened to humanity. The whole truth about their species. The system had kept its word, and the burning avatar of man was, in a word, furious. Fortunately, his plus perk was well suited for someone ready to go on a suicidal death march against the enemies of all mankind. The consuming fire. It would consume his life after 1 year, and then be offered to another human, but only if he made it the year. The next person would receive a more powerful version of the perk, and if they made it, then an even more powerful version would be given after that. Only a year to live, but he would level 10 times as fast, and was guaranteed to receive extra skills per level in addition to the starting skills of his class. Regeneration of the Endless Troll, Skin of the Stone Drake, Mind of the Hydra, Eyes of Justice, Honored of the Elemental, Conjured Assistance, Tireless. The burning avatar of man had been told his clock started the moment he entered the world, but that his skills and abilities would activate before then. He was told that he must touch a town crystal before he could level, however, and that he would be at his most vulnerable until then. He was also told he would be allowed to take the tutorial, which no other plus player was allowed to do. He was tireless, and ran for days through the endless labyrinth before he found a portal that served his needs. It had been called the Town Crystal of the Dark City, and his Eyes of Justice told him that the enemies of mankind were congregated most thickly beyond it, and further, his conjured assistants assured him he would be able to survive long enough to activate the level system and begin the tutorial. After that, nobody would be able to stop him. Being transformed into a fairy with wings of literal fire did not bother him. He stood in the tutorial area for approximately 15 seconds. His sharp eyes and his mind of the Hydra allowing him to process information at a dizzying speed. The tutorial was interesting, in that it rewarded those who took risks. There were different modes, ranging from true tutorial to impossible. And the rules were, the higher the level of risk of a tutorial, the greater the rewards. 15 seconds, a noticeable slice of his life now. He stood stock still as his head slowly rotated from fully left to fully right, comprehending everything. His life flashed before his eyes, his time as a jihadi, when he'd burned with zeal, now revealed as a cruel joke played on him by aliens who wanted all of mankind dead. They'd been fighting the wrong empire. The system had claimed the consuming fire was a hidden option, only shown to those who would take it no matter what. The man did not understand the logic, nor did he care to devote precious time to understand it. His face spasmed in fury, then set in an expression any warrior would recognize. 15 seconds to generate the resolve needed to sustain him for a year, and then ran in a full sprint towards the portal labeled Impossible. 3 days later, he emerged, a full-sized human with a simple, indestructible longsword. He exited the tutorial and began his work. To the residents of the Dark City, slavery was a way of life, and the newest slaves, the human fairy race, had proved enormously valuable. Besides their ability to be transformed into Quasar-class soul gems, they were valuable alive as well. They were magical, after all, and there was long-term sustainable value to be had in exploiting that. To the burning avatar of man, all the residents of the Dark City were enemies of mankind, and his Eyes of Justice confirmed it. When he emerged, he stilled for the last time in his life, merely to pick a direction to start running. Then he'd sprinted down the street and began spilling blood without remorse, without hesitation, and without mercy. Every kill made him stronger, and he felt his level rising with each passing minute. By the time the guards and the higher levels got to him, it was much, much too late. Chapter 13. The way Ben would tell the story, the first thing he did was fly into the air, getting above the axe beetle. The real first thing he did was scream like a little girl and unfortunately piss his, well, no pants, but he did urinate in fear. Then he flew into the air and across the room, getting away from the dangerous monster with the large, sharp, shiny metal axe. Ha! Ben pointed and laughed, in the unique way reserved for winged creatures looking at something that couldn't fly. The beetle skidded and turned around like a fucking Tokyo Drift race car, then flung its massive axe in a cinematic overhead throw. Ben was very fortunate he hadn't been in the middle of a blink, or he'd be missing an arm, or have been cut in half. He hadn't even felt himself dodge, and he didn't have time to think about how the unconscious mind must have a bunch of pre-programmed reactions. The axe was lodged into the wood behind Ben. And he watched the warrior insect raise one of its huge arms, pointing a chitinous, segmented hand at the axe, which started to quiver. "I've seen enough movies, you fuck!" Ben shouted, then opened a utility pocket in front of the axe just as it started to fly back to the beetle. "Whap!" Ben shouted, breathing hard, once again pretending his sound effect was a real skill, as the axe was successfully stolen. The beetle stood there for a full 2 seconds, arms still outstretched. Something about its body language made Ben think it was thinking to itself, "Oh my God, he stole my axe, that's against the rules." In reality, the insect was feeling slightly foolish about throwing its axe in the first place when it should have just done this instead. The beetle flexed its powerful legs and exploded off of the ground like a firework, tearing up the floor as it shot straight at Ben. "Stop!" Ben cried, blasting himself away with a speed ring, the resulting wind catching along the walls and circulating around the room, kicking up dust and debris in a gentle cyclone. "That's illegal!" Ben shouted, very aware that he could either say a bunch of stupid stuff to keep his morale good, or he could start screaming about how he didn't want to die. The slightly put-out armored beetle mini-boss did not heed Ben's calls to law and order, and instead flipped midair with a flutter of insectile wings, caught the wall with its legs, and shot itself like a living bullet at Ben once again. Ben dodged, this time blasting the thing with a thick, pressurized beam of seawater, which knocked the beetle off course. It was not able to flip and instead crashed into the somewhat soft wood of the dungeon's wall, where its gigantic horn got stuck. It hissed and clacked in frustration. Surging its powerful body away from the wall, the beetle attempted to pull itself loose. "Ah!" Ben screamed, launching crates and rocks and pretty much anything that he could think of that might hurt the beetle. The crates, which were the largest and heaviest items Ben had, did the most damage, which is to say, not much at all. The shell was just too strong, and there was no way to pull it apart. With a tremendous tear, the beetle pulled itself loose from the wall and leisurely picked the wood stuck to it off. Ben knew in that moment that the beetle warrior was intelligent, and that it had dismissed him as a credible threat. Ben didn't have much left in his utility pouch. A few more rocks, a shitty spear, a nearly broken sword, a bunch of armor that better qualified as scrap metal, a bunch of salt water, some fish chunks, some sand, some salt, some iron dust, a snail corpse. Basically, Ben became instantly aware of everything he was holding, and none of it was useful because none of it could break the beetle's armor and reveal what Ben hoped was a vulnerable, soft inside. "The axe," Ben thought to himself, then slapped his own face. Why didn't he use the axe? "Damn it! Because he can recall the axe. Focus, Ben!" He berated himself as the physically superior warrior finished dusting off wood chips and turned to face him. Not wasting any time, the beetle blasted off again. He's going to tire me out, Ben realized. He doesn't even care I can get him stuck in the wall because he knows I can't hurt him. Ben merely dodged, watching for something, anything he could use. The monster fluttered its wings again, turning around and shooting with eerie accuracy at Ben once more. He noticed it would use the wings once or twice while shooting towards him, the thick shell of its back opening, then closing. Ben managed to get away, his mind working in overdrive, trying to figure out how to use what he had to kill the monster. Nothing he had would be able to take advantage of that brief vulnerability. Ben attached a utility pocket to the beast's face and created the most powerful suction he could, trying to rip an eye out or do any kind of damage. It seemed to be working for about half a second, until the monster realized what was going on, and then Ben learned a neat feature of the utility pocket. The cost of using it went up dramatically if it was attached to someone or something that didn't want it there. Ben canceled the pocket and nearly got hit by the monster's next jump. He scowled and used another speed ring to get into a more advantageous position, then repeated the seawater trick, but this time also added in a speed ring to really mess with the beetle. It worked spectacularly well. Ben heard a crack and saw that its horn had lodged deep inside the wood of the dungeon wall, and that a hairline crack had formed along the head and down the chest of the monster. It seemed stunned for a moment. Then it started moving, its extremely powerful body pushing and prying at the wall, trying to get itself loose once again. Ben and the beetle had the same thought at about the same time. This wall trick wasn't going to work a third time. Shit, 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 shit! Ben spat the word rapid fire, repeating it over and over, while he desperately tried to think of anything that even might work. He wanted to just jump on the thing's back and pry the wings open. But if he got that close, he'd be in range of its arms and legs, plus he was pretty sure the shell that concealed the wings could close with enough force to cut his fingers off. Ben tried to make a utility pocket inside of the monster, but just the act of doing it gave Ben the sense that trying what he was about to try would completely drain his mana, and that it wouldn't kill the brute. His eyes carefully studied the shape of the wings, trying to find any vulnerability at all, but the shell sat pretty much snug together without any gaps. "Fuck this," Ben growled, then stopped thinking about it and wasting the last moments of his life. He'd rather go down doing something rather than standing there like a naked moron with a shitty crown on his head. With an effort of will, Ben created a very tiny utility pocket, just a very small hole. Then started blasting air at the hairline seam where the back shell met to protect the wings. The left side of the shell flapped open for just a second, and as for who was more surprised, Ben or the beetle, nobody could say. They both paused in their efforts for a second. Then the beetle restarted its efforts to get free and even seemed to have doubled them. "Shit, shit, 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 shit!" Ben was yelling. The mini-boss chamber music was blaring, along with a sound like a really powerful can of compressed air through a straw, like a keyboard cleaner, filled the area with its signature shh. The beetle was flexing its wings shut now, Ben could tell. He realized that if there was any time to start burning his entire mana pool at once, it was right fucking now, because there wasn't a fight once the bug got loose. "Ah!" Ben yelled, feeling his brain practically shrink from the sudden mental load. The shell was blasted open, and held open for one long, crucial moment. Ben shot the axe out of a large pocket, and it lodged itself between the soft inside and the hard outside of his opponent. For the first time, Ben heard the beetle cry out in pain and frustration. Its efforts to get free paused just for a moment before it started working even harder to get loose. Ben heard some ominous snapping and cracking noises and realized the monster was going to snap its own horn off. "No time!" Ben yelled, then ran towards the beetle's body, pulling the rusty short sword from his utility pocket and jumping onto the thing's back. He plunged the blade deep into the monster while it bucked and kicked. The sword snapped in half inside its back, and Ben was kicked off. He flew through the air. Luckily, the kick hadn't broken anything, but it had scraped a deep oval-like scrap of flesh back on his side. Ben crashed into the wall and looked down, then looked up and felt sick. The image of his own ribs and the accordion-like wrinkles his still-attached skin had formed burned into his mind. Blood started seeping freely, and it felt strangely nice against his cold, clammy, sweaty skin. The beetle was still struggling to get loose, but its movements were getting slower and slower. It struggled with one last, utterly mighty exertion of strength, then collapsed with a huge sigh. Ben only then realized how hard he was breathing. Full lungful in, full lungful out. Practically a full second per cycle. He felt lightheaded and he felt good. No pain at all, just a little tired. The exits to the room opened themselves up once again, proving to Ben, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the axe beetle really was dead. His immediate impulse was to try and store the body away in his utility pocket. Whap! Ow! No, okay, no thanks, I'll wait, Ben said, feeling a sharp, splitting headache come on the moment he tried to use any mana. Yeah, just gonna sit here for a few minutes, Ben thought, then shut his eyes. You have advanced to level 3. Skill gained. Lucky dodge. Crown skill. The prince has no clothes. You have advanced to level 4. Skill gained. Short sword proficiency, apprentice. Royal antique restoration, left hand. Mana burst. Utility pocket skill gained. That's my sword. High pressure. Prince, level 4. Ben started back awake and felt a dull, painful ache in his side. He looked down and saw the still seeping wound that had been gouged into his flesh. He scrunched his nose, prayed that the ring of sacrifice would make him lucky, then began launching crates at the ceiling to break them. He got a few more of the strange money crystals, and on the very last box, a paper heart glided down like a leaf, landing perfectly on its point and floating in the air. He reached for it, then got a strange sense that he should pull his scrunched-up flesh where it was supposed to be before he healed. Ben, if he were to ever retell the story, wouldn't hide the fact that he vomited when he pulled his skin into place like he had. It sat like a bruised-up, ugly, wrinkled, bloody skin bandage, but it covered his ribs and was about where it was supposed to be. He grabbed the heart, and as it vanished, a heat rushed up his arm and poured through his body into the places that hurt the most. It warmed his flesh for moments, then disappeared. When Ben looked down, the gouge was visible as only an ugly blue and black bruise. It looked like someone had taken a large, round-headed paintbrush and painted a bruise onto his side, an oval smear. But the skin was whole, attached, and smooth. It hurt if he twisted or moved, but it didn't make him feel a sense of sickening dread when he saw or thought of it. This was something that was going to heal, which was more than he could have said before the paper heart did its work. Ben stood up, gingerly probed his mana pool, and was relieved to find it had recovered about 60%. It was more than half and less than 3/4. Right about now, Ben would have appreciated a little blue mana bar that told him exactly what he had in the tank, but he'd selected the utility pocket instead of the perk that would have given him stuff like that. Knowledge was power, but the ability to steal and store anything was also power, one that Ben had never before possessed. With a mad grin, Ben swiped his hand in the direction of the dead axe beetle. Whap, he said, his cadence fast and abrupt, his tone light. A utility pocket appeared at the tip of the still lodged horn, and then rushed down the length, the horn vanishing as the utility pocket stowed it away. As the body fell from the wall, the pocket raced forward, opening wide like an enormous bag. The body never even hit the floor. I'm getting really good at that, Ben said, staring at his hand in wonder, then feeling at his brain. It would be like if someone suddenly started curling 40-pound dumbbells when before they could only do 20s, and then grabbing the bicep. Mana burst? Ben mused out loud, then shrugged. It sure would be nice to have a window that told me what these skills did. But again, Ben had chosen the utility pocket as his plus perk rather than the ever-piercing eyes. If Ben had been the kind of person who was good at planning things out and min-maxing a character in games, sure, that would have been the perfect choice. But he knew as well as anyone who watched him play that he wasn't a very skilled gamer. Still, the tools of the system ability that came with the eyes had tempted Ben more than anything. Must be mana burst, Ben said, and nodded, agreeing with himself for at least the second time in a day. He stood up and tried to stretch out in a way that didn't hurt. Then he gave up on that, and just tried to stretch out in the way that hurt the least, and more or less succeeded. God, that smarts, Ben said, trying not to wince every time the skin on his side moved and aggravated his bruise. Fun fact about anatomy, which Ben was getting firsthand, pretty much every movement tugs on the skin on the sides of the ribs one way or another. I am the champion, Ben said quietly, his voice strained with discomfort. Ow! I beat the bug. I'm the best. Ow! Ben stopped congratulating himself and started focusing on his surroundings. There were 2 unexplored tunnels in the axe beetle's chamber, one of which was a bright silver door with a keyhole, and the other of which was just another dark tunnel. Ben looked at the darkness, felt the pain in his side, then looked at the shiny, beautiful, silver door. It was circular, like a hobbit house door, and the keyhole was large and in the center. By all that's holy, I hope there's treasure behind that door and not another fucking axe beetle, Ben said, then pulled out his silver key and approached the locked door. He tried walking for a bit, but his feet were completely bare and the ground was a little on the rough side, so he floated a few inches off the ground. When he tried to put the key in the lock, he encountered the oddest resistance, like trying to put 2 north poles of magnets together. It wasn't strong, but it did mean he had to really focus. Ben gripped the key with both hands and pushed past the resistant force. When the key actually entered the keyhole, it also behaved as though magnetized, snapping into place and turning on its own. The door's internal mechanisms sounded complex, a series of clicks and pops that went on for about 3 seconds. Then there was a soft hiss, and the door started evaporating like dry ice. Keykeeper! A voice sounded from the door. It sounded like the host of a game show announcing a prize. Nice, Ben said, catching the key as it fell, and noticing it now had a visible 1 impressed into its shaft. I really wanted to try and get through that door, though. Would have been nice to launch something that big and heavy at a monster. No gas was released as the door vanished, and the process was reasonably quick, so Ben kept his eyes on it as he went. Little holes appeared and got bigger all over the door, pieces falling off and evaporating before they hit the ground. Then the whole thing collapsed in on itself, and Ben got a peek into the next room. 3 chests sat next to one another. They were made from rich, red-painted wood with golden highlights. The one on the far left had no lock, the one in the center had a silver lock, and the one on the far right had an ornate golden lock with little horns on it. A little wooden sign sat in the room, made from the same green wood as the rest of the lair dungeon, and painted on its face was a single word. Choose. Well, none of them are mimics, Ben said, his mimic sense telling him that the chests were for sure chests, And interestingly enough, also telling him that they were real chests with real treasures inside them. He glanced down at the silver key he'd gotten to keep from his key keeper perk, and had the thought that it was his only silver key. How rare were these things? How useful were they? Treasure would be nice, but there was no guarantee the bigger chests would have what he needed. Ben had to ask himself, too, what if he couldn't clear the dungeon? The axe beetle had been dangerous and smart, and luck had played too large of a role in his victory over it. Would the next room in the dungeon be even more dangerous? Could he survive a fight if there were, God forbid, two of those things? Hell, could he win if there was just one beetle and only one other monster in the room? He didn't know. He did not know. Choose? Ben raised an eyebrow, his mind trailing off into a silent question, examining the room critically. He didn't see any traps, no hidden compartments monsters might be hiding in, no faintly etched magical runes, nothing. He walked into the treasure chamber, and his eyes immediately went to his exit, which remained open. Good sign, Ben said, then started walking around the 3 chests one by one. He looked at the ground, then examined the woodwork, trying to find any indication of what would happen once he'd choosed a chest. The chests each seemed to have a little button on the front, which was how he assumed they opened up. It didn't say choose a chest, Ben said, already edging out of the room. It just said choose, so I choose. Ben, once he was at maximum range and outside of the treasure room, opened a utility pocket wide enough to grab all 3 chests. It spread across the ground like ink on paper, a solid black shadow with purple edges that seemed to wiggle with anticipation. Whap! Ben snapped, both with his voice and with his fingers, feeling his mana take a sharp hit from the distance, the size, and the force by which Ben had stolen all 3 chests. He succeeded, and Ben crouched low into a ready position, eyes sharp and ready for pretty much anything but what actually happened. The sign vanished slowly, and then was gone. Mentally, Ben checked his utility pouch and found all 3 chests were still there. "Ha! Beat the system," he said, though he wasn't talking about the system so much as rules in general anywhere. He sat down cross-legged and released the first chest, the one without a lock. This was a no-brainer, Ben said, and pressed the button to open it up without ceremony. The chest, however, was big into ceremony. The lid slowly opened, and soft white light was released. The light smelled like lavender and fabric softener, and all the other nice smells that put people at ease. The contents were obscured by the light until the chest was fully open, and what Ben saw was... well, he'd been hoping for a sword, or a pair of pants, or even a bathrobe. He'd settle for a bathrobe. What he got was a small pile of the white, probably money, crystals, and a large, clear octahedron, an 8-sided piece of clear glass that looked like 2 pyramids stuck together base to base. "Oh well," Ben said, taking the money and brushing his finger against the novel crystal. "You have found a disposable town crystal, one-time use. Would you like to activate it now? Service will be available for 4 hours after you leave the crystal unattended." Ben thought about it for about 2 seconds, then realized holding on to this thing wouldn't do him any good if he died in the next room, and that running from the dungeon wasn't a real option for him. He felt, through his class as a prince, that if he abandoned his tree, he would lose his royal title and all the skills associated with it. "Yes," Ben said. And the crystal rose into the air and floated to the center of the room he was in, the room he'd fought the axe beetle in. For the first time, Ben saw an actual menu appear in front of him, like he was really in a game. Temporary town crystal, lowest grade, located in the lair of the Aeon Slug. Time remaining, 4 hours. Features available: shop, gamble, full heal, 1 remaining, suggestion box. Ben selected the suggestion box, then unselected it, because all he was going to do was write a really profanity-laden, pissed-off message. Congratulations! For exercising good judgment in the use of the suggestion box, you have been granted a shop voucher. Shop voucher. A gesture of goodwill merits goodwill in return. Allows the purchase of any item for free. Like goodwill, this is short-lived. 1 hour until expiration. Ben rolled his eyes and accepted the free gift, then selected the shop option. You have 63C. More than I thought I had, Ben whispered. Please note, higher-grade crystals will have a larger selection of items available, and at better prices. As with all shops, the number of purchases per week is limited. The sell function is unavailable, grade too low. Healing or mana potion times 1, 1500C. Basic outfit piece, pants or shirt or boots, etc. times 1, 100C. Perk lottery ticket, 10,000C. Perk removal sponge, 10,000C. Basic ration times 1, 10C. Ben eyed the options, thought about his shop voucher, and decided again that now wasn't the time to be holding things in reserve. You have redeemed a shop voucher and purchased a perk lottery ticket. Good fortune, adventurer. This shop can support only 1 more purchase. Would you like to continue shopping? Ben swiped the shop away, then selected Gamble. Only the most basic gamble is available. Seek out higher-grade town crystals for more exciting games with more esoteric wagers. Coin toss, 50C wager. Heads, you win and double your money. Tails, you lose. Would you like to play? Ben really wanted that basic outfit, so he took the gamble and lost most all of his money. Ooh, bad luck. You only have 13C remaining. No wager is available. Ben sucked in some air through his teeth and softly swore, and then cursed his nakedness, and then cursed gambling everywhere, and then pulled out the perk lottery ticket and proceeded to gamble again. You are redeeming times 1 perk lottery ticket. You will be given between 1 and 3 choices. Rolling 2. Rolling for the number of perks revealed, 1. You have 2 perks to choose from, and one of them is hidden. Please note that you must choose a perk. Legendary, blood perk. Hidden, create minor elemental. Very common, special perk. This is a one-time use perk. A wand of create minor elemental will be given to you. This allows you to create a permanently bound minor elemental that will level independently of you. It must have a powerful source of its element nearby at all times, or it will die. Don't give it a name. It's not going to survive long enough for it to matter. Seriously, go to a town crystal and send the system a message. He'll give you the sad stats. Ben frowned and focused on his 2 options. If he hadn't already redeemed a perk lottery ticket and seen Mind Horror, he would have already selected the unknown legendary blood perk. He was still considering it. On the other hand, create minor elemental sounded... Well, the description basically said it was shit. Ben had doubts about that because the elemental could level and therefore probably get stronger. Further, no matter how weak it was, right now he was fighting literal bugs in an extremely tiny environment. No better place to level up a weak creature, Ben thought. Plus, it was a known quantity, whereas the unknown legendary perk was, well, it could do anything. Plus, his luck had been kind of shit when he was gambling just a few seconds ago, and the sore feeling of losing still hadn't faded. You have gained a wand of create minor elemental. Hidden perk revealed. That's just cruel, Ben said before he saw what he missed out on. Worm blood transforms your blood into billions of tiny living worms. They will stitch your body together from even the most grievous of wounds, and only fire will be able to kill you. See if you can last a week before screaming, "They're inside me!" and then lighting yourself on fire. So far, nobody's made it a week. Well, that sounds fucking horrifying, Ben said, eyebrows all the way up. Then, interrupting his ability to imagine in horrifying, tactile detail the feeling of having a billion tiny living worms for blood, a wand appeared in his hand with a dry, dusty poof. The wand looked like something someone would have bought at Walmart for a friend's kid who was also kind of a brat. That is to say, it looked like a cheap plastic joke. The shaft of it was too large to comfortably fit his hand around, and the end of it was a pastel yellow star. Ha! Ben snorted when he saw it, the laugh entirely involuntary. It was just too funny, really. He pointed it at the wall of the dungeon, and a prompt appeared in his mind. Create minor dungeon wood elemental? Ben declined, because he doubted he would encounter much dungeon wood in his travels, and he sort of wanted to spite the system by having his minor elemental succeed. Ben focused on the air in front of him. Create minor air elemental. Nah, Ben said, declining. He would doubtless be surrounded by air for most of the rest of his life, but he couldn't see the added value of having an air elemental, when he already had a utility pocket that filled the same function. Plus, it just seemed a little basic. Ben opened a pocket in front of him, then dropped the axe he'd stolen. Wait, the monster was dead. He dropped the axe he'd lawfully and rightfully looted, then pointed the wand at the axe. Create minor metal elemental? Ben repackaged his focus to see how abstract he could get with this. Create minor axe elemental. Ha! Ben said, then declined. He began to cycle through everything in his utility pouch, trying to come up with more and more abstract and esoteric elementals just to put the wand through its paces. Water elemental, sand elemental, iron elemental, salt elemental, crown elemental, and Ben had to suppress a dumb, class-based urge to select that one. Portal elemental? Would you like to create a minor portal elemental? What? Ben asked, realizing he'd accidentally pointed the wand at his utility pocket. Oh, he said. Then his eyes widened. Oh! Ben tried different angles and different ways of thinking about the utility pocket, just to see if he could shake a slightly rarer and more exotic verbiage out of the wand. Nothing worked, until he focused on the little purple tendrils that seemed to wiggle and wave at him in a friendly way. Would you like to create a minor utility pouch elemental? Yes! Ben shouted, more in triumph than anything else. The wand started to glow, and suddenly Ben was aware that he was holding an object of real magic, and that he was completely wrong about how cheap it looked. The star at the end became bright, like an actual sun. Then it cracked, the whole wand snapping in half long ways, and purple and black energies rose from the broken pieces. They coalesced on the ground into a little blob creature, with 4 distinct blobby limbs. It was the dark space of the utility pocket's portal given life. It tested one limb, then the next, and took a gentle step forward. Then, it opened a portal, went through, and vanished. "Frankie?" Ben called out. "Where'd you go, little buddy?" Side chapter. The hunter stalks through the forest like a great white shadow. He is the master of stealthy movement, like a shark in the ocean," Short Bus said, in a stage whisper, wholly unaware of how far his voice was carrying. "The prey animals of the land are crafty, possessing keen senses of smell and sight that allow them to flee from the ultimate predator." Short Bus's movements were quite silent as he stalked through the forest, but his constant external monologue completely ruined any real attempts at stealth. "He is the avatar of hunger, because he is very hungry. A shark denied his destiny to be the biggest shark that ever lived, banished from his homeland by a very large purple cloud. He stalks through the forest like a great... Oh, wait. I already said that part." Then Short Bus frowned, delighting in his new facial muscles. There weren't many, at least as far as a human was concerned, but for Short Bus, going from 0 facial expressions to anything was a huge improvement. He wiggled his whatever past his eyebrows, doing a little wave with them. He felt along his razor-sharp teeth with his new, flexible tongue, which he used to vocalize constantly while hunting. Short Bus sniffed the air, smelling the animal he had been tracking for way too long. Honestly, he was a terrible hunter on land. He was about half deaf as far as a human would measure it. "A shark never stops swimming, even on land, his restless tail ever fanning the air behind him," Short Bus said, then glanced back for the 100th time to make sure all his fins were still there. They were, including his caudal, of which he was very proud. "A shark never stops moving, but that might be an ocean rule. Because I'm feeling a little weak in the legs," he said, then sat straight down on the ground, moving his eyes around and blinking. 2 more new things he would never get tired of. The forest, to him, was extremely strange. He felt like he was inside of a gigantic, flat tidal cave that just stretched on forever. "Oh, man," he said out loud. "I remember that time the tide went out. Wow, that was embarrassing. Then those humans found me and were tossing me fish like I was a dolphin, and to my shame I ate the fish because I was hungry. I am still hungry," he said, staring at the solid canopy above him. "I miss Ben," he said loudly, thinking he was whispering softly to himself. It was right about that time that the air in the lair of the Aeon slug started to circulate out, and Short Bus caught 2 familiar scents. The first was blood, but that could have belonged to anyone. The second was the smell of Ben pissing himself, which was completely unmistakable to Short Bus's superior sense of smell. "I am the greatest tracker to ever step my dinosaurus-like feet on land," Short Bus said, a shark's smile on his face, his exhaustion suddenly forgotten. "I'm coming, little buddy." Side chapter. The system still looked like the devil, mostly because he hadn't bothered to change his form back yet, and he thought he looked rather cool as the human ideal of evil. "I'm totally stealing this design," he said, probing at the gigantic horns. "I could probably update the entire hell layer and nobody would even call me out on it," he said, then pressed a button in the fabric of reality that started to play some extremely heavy metal. "I could probably steal this entire genre, too, and only the humans would notice. Wait, that means I'll have to pay them extra. I can probably fold it into their level-ups. They don't need to know," the system said, talking to himself. Not like how Ben talked to himself. The system was literally communicating with countless instances of himself, each walking around, doing their own thing, solving their own problems, like a gigantic hive mind of beings that all currently looked like the devil, which they weren't. Well, if I'm stealing rock and roll, I might as well steal all of it, all the genres. Blast these rules about cultural theft. I never would have agreed to them if I'd known the humans were going to come back with so much art and music. They even remembered to claim legal ownership of most of it. They're such cheaters. Nobody should be able to store so many memories in their DNA. That's complete nonsense. The system experimented by growing out a black goatee, then started styling it to look more and more sinister, until it reached peak sinisterness, and then passed it into post-irony sinister, which just looked silly. He would have continued experimenting with facial hair for ever, except his desk was beeping at him. He wasn't a being who had a sense of boredom, and he'd invented the tireless perk, like how he'd invented most all of the perks and skills. Well, invent was a strong word. He took the invasion of personal privacy to an entirely new level and monitored everything about everyone who was inside of the world, who had also accepted the level and class system, which everyone had and would continue to do. If they did something new or interesting, he'd just copy it, refine it, standardize it, and repackage it as a skill. The best part was the people of the world did most of that work for him, too. Sometimes he'd grant broken, unusable, but interesting skills to players just to see if they could salvage anything useful out of them. Most of the time they failed, but if he seeded the skill 1 billion times over 10 years, well, he usually got something promising. The system sighed and pulled himself away from the mirror, still thinking about skills and perks. He would never admit this, but about 70% of the skill system had been generated by humanity the last time they'd been here. Just a really creative bunch of killers in that group, he said, then sat down to look at the beeping paperwork. He didn't always have paperwork. In fact, it was a recent addition to his life. He'd scanned the minds of tens of millions of office workers when he inducted humanity into the world, and he'd learned a thing or two about both efficiency and procrastination. Apparently, some procrastination was good for efficiency, for reasons no human would ever be able to explain, and for reasons the system didn't care to examine too closely. So he'd been enjoying a little time off from work. Ah! Ben's made it to a town crystal. Excellent. Oh, look at that face, the system said, chuckling fondly, looking at the archived footage of Ben's utter what-the-fucking-shit face he'd had when he was turned into a fairy. I'm saving that one, he said, then captioned it with something witty and sent it to all the other instances of the system via something that approximated email. They'd discovered memes were a thing, and right now the "I've just been turned into a fairy" meme was extremely in among the instances of the system. Ah, human memes. So much better than cats, the system said, still chuckling, a big smile on his demonic face. Oh? What's this? He said, the mirth evaporating as he read over Ben's most recent data. Create minor elemental. That one's always been a stinker. Wait, what? The system squinted, making sure it wasn't seeing things. A utility pocket elemental. Oh. That's the beeping. It's the balance monitor. That was an extremely common perk, wasn't it? Either I give Ben the old cheater, pumpkin eater perk, the system said, making massive air quotes with his red and black clawed fingers, or I have some balancing to do. Well, let's see what manner of monstrosity humanity's created this time. The system pulled up an image of the utility pocket elemental. And to the system, everything was labeled like it was an MMORPG. The little blob of living dimensional distortion stood on blobby little legs. Everything about it was round. The system frowned when he pulled up the status sheet of the elemental, which contained inherent capabilities that were decidedly not extremely common. He looked again at the elemental, then saw floating above its body a little name in green letters with level 1 under it. It's been around for literally 3 seconds, and he already named it Frankie, the system said, a dry, straight expression on his face. That's the exact opposite of what the perk description says to do. The system hemmed and hawed, looking at little Frankie, then shrugged, took a picture, made a meme out of it, and sent it to all the other instances of the system. The response was quite instant, and he reached a majority consensus in favor of Ben. He usually sided with the players, but occasionally the Greys or the Dwarves would do something which was an explicit exploit. Even then, they only got the hammer if what they were doing was a direct danger to the delicate balance of the world. It's hard to get things that are not and should not be to agree to get carved up into gremlins if they didn't think they even had a chance. "Thank you, humans," the system said, as he reclassified Create Minor Elemental as a rare perk with all the associated rebalancing work. Then he sent out the standard reward he gave to anyone who did his job for him, which was him saying thank you, and nothing else. "I've got the best job in the universe," the system said when he was done, putting his cloven hoof feet on his desk and leaning back. Moments later, he burst out in wheezing, hysterical laughter as one of the other popular kinds of memes was sent his way. "Oh, those void souls," the system said. "Oh, they are so bad! Oh, that's hysterical," he said, slapping his desk, then feeling refreshed to get back to it and start crunching some numbers. It could go without saying, but it will be said in honor of the dead and the dying, that those who found themselves in the unfortunate position of being in a meme with a void soul did not find it funny. They didn't find it funny at all. Chapter 14. From the very first second Ben had seen his utility pocket elemental, he knew he'd made the right choice. The very next second after the first, he just spent admiring the little blobby thing. In the third second, he'd named it Frankie. Why that particular name, Ben had no idea, but he really liked it, and he was as proud as he could be of his new pet. Then Frankie had opened a portal and vanished, and Ben had no idea where he'd gone off to. He called out and heard no answer. Then he felt something he'd never felt before from his utility pocket. Movement. Something inside of it was moving around and touching things, moving them about and interacting with them. When Ben focused on the source of the disturbance, he found Frankie. The amount of relief he felt was, in a word, absurd. He'd known the elemental for 83 seconds. Irrational or not, Ben felt much better now that he knew Frankie was still around and that he was submerged in the element he needed to survive. Ben expected to feel a pull on his mana pool to sustain the elemental, but felt nothing. "Guess the little guy's bringing his own magic to the party. Neat," Ben said, then tried to eject the elemental so he could get a better look at it. A utility pocket opened, and Ben willed Frankie to come out. But Frankie did not come out. Frankie stayed exactly where he was and continued sorting through all of Ben's stuff, organizing it or something. "Oh, okay," Ben said. "No, that's my bad. It makes sense he would want to stay in there." Then Frankie ate the antique spear Ben had looted. What? Ben said, feeling the item vanish from his inventory. Before he had a chance to say something like, "No, bad elemental, give that back," and embarrass himself, a utility pocket appeared in Ben's left hand, and the spear sort of forced itself into his palm. It was the oddest sensation, really it was. He felt his fingers being manipulated by the utility pocket's ability to push and pull. They were gently separated, and then the spear erupted into the gap, and the pocket pulled his fingers onto the shaft. Two things happened after that. First, Ben felt his mana start to drain at a slow, steady rate. Second, the rust started to fall off the spear. "What's happening?" Ben asked, then felt the answer in the space of his brain devoted to his skills. Royal Antique Restoration, left hand. Right, I have that skill. Shit, I should have used that on the sword. In response, Frankie swam through the utility pocket and started to gently pry the broken remains of the old sword from the axe beetle's body. Once they were loose, Frankie ate them. "You are just a helpful little dude, aren't you?" Ben commented. And Frankie, there's not a remotely graceful or accurate way to describe the actuality of what happened in this moment. Suffice to say, Frankie turned towards Ben with what could qualify as his head, and then wiggled some purple tendrils at him that had appeared out of nowhere. Ben was pretty sure it was like a purr in a cat, but he was positive that it was an expression of happiness. He watched Frankie get back to work. The little guy wasn't fast, but he didn't ever stop in there. Ben noticed him occasionally take a bit of something or something else, but at this point, Ben trusted Frankie was on his side. He looked around the room, which was green, glowing, and showed signs of a serious fight. The wood was splintered or deeply dented where the axe beetle had kicked off from it, and a great torn gouge marked where it had gotten stuck in the wall the first time. When Ben looked over to the spot where it had been stuck a second time, his eyes widened in shock. It was a startlingly violent scene. The first thing that struck him about it was the shadow of the monster, the large oval where its chest had been pressed up to the wood, the least damaged part of the wall. Outside of that, Ben could see where the powerful creature had been clawing at the wood, finger-shaped gouges all over the place. His memory surged, and he remembered standing on the back of that thing, a rusty sword in his hand. He had seen it tearing at the wall with its arms, hadn't he? Then he saw the stains from the blood around the torn, deep hole that its horn had made. In a way, it was interesting to examine, because the horn had gone in, then been removed with the utility pocket. Some parts of the wood were broken and torn up, but near the end, Ben could see a near-perfect mold of the horn. He took his hand off of the town crystal and sat down, staring at the scene. The spear dropped from his hand and was quickly swallowed up by a pocket from Frankie. "That looks awful," Ben said, chin resting on his knuckles as he stared in a near stupor. It doesn't even feel real," Ben said, looking down at the deep, terrible bruise on his side, and felt a wave of nausea come over him when he remembered what it had looked like before. "This is just insane," Ben said, sitting up straight and pointing with his entire hand, emphasizing how hard he was pointing. Looking off to the side, he suddenly felt terribly alone. He looked back at the wall and suddenly felt a terrible dread, because he realized it reminded him of an old job he'd had in his early 20s. Crime scene cleanup. He'd worked for a company called BioScrub for about 9 months up in the Pacific Northwest. They'd been based out of a town north of Seattle, but their service area extended to southern Oregon and as far out as Missoula, Montana. He'd been single and just out of the house and really out on his own for the first time. He'd gotten the job because he'd had some idea about visiting Washington State and living there for a while as a vacation. That had gone great, till he ran out of money in like a week, and he didn't want to go home. BioScrub had worked because they hired him the moment his application was filled out. He doubted they'd ever read it. The turnover rate for that job was insane. Ben had been on call 24/7 with no standby pay. After 3 months, they decided he wasn't a serial killer or a total fucking weirdo, so he got to sleep in the shop. It had been set up like a police or fire station, with a room that could get completely dark any time of day, filled with about 10 really shitty beds. It was the only reason the job was remotely worth it, not having a rent payment. The pay was shit. What did they do? What did Ben get called out to do at 2 in the morning? Well, mostly he cleaned vomit out of police cars. BioScrub had a contract with pretty much every police station that said they weren't allowed to clean out their cars anymore, because some guy got crabs or herpes or something. They needed professionals. They needed BioScrub. He'd drive for 3 hours in some of the worst traffic in the country to go and put on a Tyvek suit, gloves, little white shoe covers, and use a wet vac to get half a gallon of happy hour out of the plastic floor of the back of a police car. That was 80%, and the scene on the wall didn't remind him of that. It reminded him of the other part. The first suicide he'd had to clean up after was fresh and vivid in his mind. There had been so much less blood than he'd thought there would be, and a hole in the wood ceiling from a high-caliber handgun. The guy's girlfriend had been there in the beginning, and it was at that exact moment that Ben learned one thing. He was never, ever going to kill himself. She had been white as a sheet, though it had been nearly 8 hours since the guy had ended a heated argument in the most dramatic and final way possible. She kept saying he was a fucking asshole, and how she was so glad the kids weren't home when he'd done it. The job itself had been easy, in a technical sense. The scene on the wall didn't even remind him of that. It reminded him of every time he'd ever cleaned up a fucking homicide. Those scenes were... nobody, not the cops, not the cleanup guys, not the CSI nerds. It was alarming on a neurological level. And everybody was always wound tight till they left the scene. Bloody, smeared handprints on everything. An obvious trail of destruction from the fight. The completely obvious spot someone died. "I did that," Ben said, his head slowly tilting, his eyebrows slowly building into a tight, painful frown. His mouth was slightly open, and he whispered, his eyes hot, his voice blistering yet quiet. "I fucking did that," he said, then stared, breathing hard. It was an ugly, ugly thing. Ben stood up and began to walk towards it, a utility pocket forming on each palm. He got close to it, then started spraying it down with ocean water, getting the gore off of it. It ran down the wall and around his feet, orange and green. That had been the color of the bug's blood. The utility pockets were moving around without any conscious thought on his part, anticipating his needs as he had them, and adapting to his desires. The gore was gone, but the record of what happened was literally carved into the wall, and he didn't have the tools to fix it. What would I do? Just carve a giant rectangle out of the wall? That would practically be a closet or something, he said, stepping back and going to the same spot he'd been before, at the foot of the town crystal. Ben stared and stared. The crushing feeling of loneliness he'd gotten a taste of earlier now settling in him like cold air on naked skin. "I did that," Ben said, remembering how. It wasn't easy, and it hadn't felt good. He'd been so completely aware of everything when it had been going on, but in his memory it felt like a dream. Like it hadn't just happened. Ben dumped the body of the axe beetle on the ground in front of him. "It fucking happened," Ben said, standing up, harshly rebuking himself. Then he sat back down and stared at the body. He started to shake, and he didn't want to be shaking. He wanted to feel normal again, but the shaking wouldn't stop. He was trembling hard enough to spill water out of a half-full glass, but his lips were set in a hard line, and his frown was painfully solid. Hot tears started to fall, but he refused to acknowledge it was happening. This was a hard world, a killer's world, and he'd have to be a killer too. A utility pocket formed in front of his chest, one he hadn't summoned. Frankie plopped out and landed on his lap with a soft impact. The utility pocket elemental was very light, hardly any weight to him at all. But he was warm, though. Not hot, just warm. It curled up in his lap and appeared to be sleeping, or at least pretending to sleep. One of Ben's badly shaking hands made its slow way over to Frankie and started to stroke the elemental. If Ben's hand had passed through Frankie, if the little creature of magic had been insubstantial like a ghost, Ben would have broken right there and never come back. Frankie was soft, though. Like a very soft rubber stress ball in consistency, the kind people would squeeze in an office. Ben still broke when he started to pet the strange little thing, holding his own neck up straight, his nose a little high in the air, looking away from the horrible sights in front of him while he bawled like a baby. Ugly crying. Like when his parents had died. "Oh my God," Ben thought. Then lost himself utterly to grief. When Ben was done, he stood up and put his hand on the town crystal. It only had about 15 minutes remaining till it fell apart. He considered the suggestion box again, but decided it wasn't worth the effort. Instead, Ben used the one full heal available in the town crystal. A wave of warmth washed over him, and injuries he didn't even know he had, along with the ones he was painfully aware of, closed up completely. Ben nodded once, put on his metaphoric big body pants, made sure Frankie was safely in the utility pocket, then started towards the next room of the dungeon. The hallway was unusually long and sloped upward a little bit. Ben realized it was leading him to the second floor, and if his dungeon lore was correct, dungeons got more dangerous with every floor. At least that's how it was in video games. He reached the end and floated through cautiously, ready for a fight. The room was larger than any previous, a long rectangle with a silver door at the end, and the door was behind what looked like the bars of a prison cell. Between Ben and the locked door was a swimming pool deeper than he was tall, filled with a vibrant green goo. Movement caught his eyes, and he saw, stuck to the walls on either side, 2 turret snails, like he'd fought earlier. They were retracted in their shells, but slowly coming out, burbling angrily. "Hey, I remember those guys," Ben said, his self-directing monologue lacking a bit of the energy it had before. The snails didn't respond except to continue burbling. Ben quickly flew across the room and examined the door, getting on the other side of the turret snails in the process. Ben said, then turned around to find that these snails were quite a bit faster at turning than the last one had been. 2 balls of fire shot at him, and Ben felt himself enter the grip of adrenaline once again. His eyes tracked the projectiles, and he dodged. The thing about the snails that Ben hadn't appreciated before was how fast they could shoot at him, at least once per second. Their shells were glowing. Lines of light were coming from the wall like they were drawing power directly from the dungeon. Ben flew over the green stuff, noticing a lever down at the bottom of the pool, the exact same kind of lever he'd used in the puzzle room. Okay, I get it, Ben said, then got up close behind the turret snail on his right and cracked its shell open by shooting it with rocks at high speed. To his surprise, a utility pocket opened in front of its face, and Frankie popped half of his body out, a small, almost mouth of purple tendrils on his front. He sat for half a second, then the spear shot halfway out of him, piercing the snail, then retracting back just as fast before Frankie vanished. 1 down. Ben had to dodge fireballs on his way over to the other by taking a wide, zigzaggy route. He dispatched it as well, this time allowing Frankie to take it out while he distracted it. He collected both bodies, some quiet instinct pleased that he'd gotten one with a shell intact. When the battle was over, Frankie put the spear in Ben's left hand, and he held on to it, allowing his ability to slowly repair it to take effect while he was out of combat. The white fog lifted from the door, but it was still caged and locked. Ben went over to the edge of the pool close to the door, then dipped the tiniest tip of his finger into it. It was thick and stuck to him easily. He sniffed it. It smelled sweet. He tasted it and realized it was a honey of some kind. Ben considered only for a moment, just a small moment, diving into the pool of honey, pulling the lever, and trying to get out of it before he drowned. Then he snorted a laugh and began to steal all the honey with a utility pocket, draining it like a bathtub. Ben felt a momentary rush because this honey had to be valuable, and he had an entire swimming pool's worth. Then Ben remembered he was extremely tiny, and estimated that he probably actually only had a large jar of it in real people measurements. Even with good suction, it still took a while. When he was done, the walls were still thick with the slow-moving fluid, so Ben did his best to make a squeegee utility pouch and collect as much of it as he could. Then he got the stuff pooled on the ground in the same way, floating above it, not wanting to get all sticky and dirty. He cleaned the lever, pulled it, and heard the sound of a jail door opening. When he floated up, he saw a chest with a silver lock and a single silver key sitting in front of it. Ben picked up the key and was momentarily baffled by the scene. So, normally he'd have to pick between treasure and progress. Tricky, tricky, Ben said, then scooped up the chest into his utility pocket. He figured he would open it only after he knew for a fact that he wouldn't be fucking himself over by using his last key before the dungeon was finished. The key practically appeared in his hand out of thin air. That was how good the utility pocket was getting. And it's worth noting, it was the new key, rather than the one with the 1 on it. The lock had the same bubbly, magnetic resistance as the last one, and when he got it in, the key broke into silver glitter that evaporated as fast as it formed. The lock broke apart in a glittery mist, and the door melted in the way the previous one had. It revealed the same kind of hallway he was used to, and without hesitation, Ben went through. The hallway was as long as the last one, and angled up. 3rd floor, I guess? Ben said, then emerged into the grandest, most well-decorated room he'd seen so far. There were green torches, like from the first room, 6 of them, and no skeletons. There was moss growing on the ground, and the wood in the room had a tough, worn quality to it, like it wasn't as healthy and living as the rest of the dungeon. The ceiling was tall, too, at least 4 or 5 times Ben's height. The rest of the room paled in comparison to the door at the other end. It was a massive arch shape, with a big golden-horned skull at the top. Ben was going to steal it no matter what anyone said or did, even if it took hours. No, wait. He'd make a crown out of it. An enormous, spine-crushing, fucking prince class. Oh my God, Ben thought to himself and shook the thoughts away. The door was ornamented with gold designs that formed the same elaborate eye that was featured on the silver keys. Down near the bottom, an enormous golden lock in the same shape as the skull above it held the door shut. Ben leaned on the spear, noticing that the door behind him hadn't fogged over, trapping him. No monsters, he said, then increased the flow of mana into his Royal Antique Restoration left hand, no longer feeling the need to conserve any for a fight. Ben paced around the room carefully, relishing in how soft the moss was on his feet, and laughing when he saw the bare wood behind him as he scooped it all up. It was really beautiful moss, all thick and clumpy, almost like a living green foam. He circled the room, keeping his distance from the green torches, then approached them and stole the glass-like gems, feeling some relief when the green fire vanished. He found the locked hatch under the moss in the exact center of the room. "Tricky," Ben said loudly, looking from the hatch, which had a silver lock on it, and the golden, which was clearly a boss room door. "I bet it's right here," Ben said, then bet his last key being right, unlocking the hatch and noting with delight that his key hadn't broken. Now a 2 was etched into it. He stowed Old Lucky away and opened the hatch. Sitting in a little compartment was a gaudy, gem-covered golden key with a skull that matched its lock on the end. Ben picked up the key and was surprised to find it was uncomfortably warm. He looked at the lock, then looked at the key, then looked at the door. "Oh, shit," Ben said, suddenly realizing he was planning on going in there and fighting something worse than the axe beetle. "Fuck you all," he said to nobody, and also to everybody, and marched up to the door. The spear was taken by Frankie, and Ben got a sense of determination from the little elemental. Ben nodded his head and jammed the key into the lock, turning it. The lock fell to the ground and did not vanish, so Ben immediately whacked it. The door opened away from him, slowly, dramatically. The music in the dungeon changed to ominous, dangerous. Utility pockets appeared on Ben's hands, and he floated a few inches above the ground. "Hit it hard, hit it fast, don't even hesitate, just attack," Ben said, hyping himself up. He was ready this time. He was going to clear this dungeon. He was going to level up, get strong, and figure out a way to beat the system's game. It had been done before, and it could be done again. The door finished opening, and Ben shot through, his eyes steel. He emerged into a large chamber, where a slug, about his size, with large, human-like eyes at the end of its stalks, waited. "Ah!" Ben shouted, and the slug screamed in fear. "Please, let's just talk about this," the Aeon slug yelled. And it was such an outrageous departure from what Ben had been expecting that he didn't attack the creature. The slug didn't attack him either, seeming to be breathing hard. "Oh," the Aeon slug said, visibly sagging with relief. "Oh, thank the stars, I thought I was going to die!" Ben looked to the left, then looked to the right, noticing for the first time he was in a cozy little room that looked like a study or a den. Bookshelves made from a rich-looking red wood lined the walls, and the slug was sitting in what looked like a soft dog bed, but really nice, like actual furniture. "Please," he said, indicating with an eye stalk a comfortable-looking pillow across from it. "Please sit." "Are you the Aeon slug?" Ben said, feeling uncomfortably awkward and a bit like a home invader. "Yes," the slug said. "But my name is Vivi,
It's short for something much longer and too cumbersome to be useful for conversation.
Aren't I supposed to kill you? Ben asked, gesturing towards the slug as if it wasn't clear enough. His right eye twitched. That had never happened to him before.
Well, that's...
the Aeon slug said.
Look, I can explain. Please sit.
Ben sat down and prepared himself for a good fucking explanation. In the Overcavern Forest, on the continent called the Plain of Endless Wild Magic by Aeon slugs, but which was called the Lost Continent by anyone else who lived in the world, there was a nation of fairies. Forest fairies, to be exact. Nothing like the dark fairies who had joined into one being, which named itself the Bad Cloud. The only thing forest fairies had in common with their dark cousins was a chaotic nature, a poor understanding of when a prank had gone too far, the omnivore perk, which had just been granted to all the fairy races, a new fondness for eating meat, an intensely xenophobic attitude towards all non-fairy subspecies, a culture that emphasized the importance of going out and engaging in combat of some kind on a daily basis, the ability to mass communicate with one another by laughing as a group, color coordination with their element, greens and browns and blues for forest fairies, and black and purple and gray for dark fairies, and... Well, they were exactly like dark fairies in almost every way. Most fairies were pretty much the same in terms of their average mass temperament. The difference was, forest fairies didn't think it was fun to hurt things for days on end. 10 minutes, please and thank you, they would say. That's a lie. No fairy has ever said please and thank you, not even as a joke. It's likely only a few have ever said please in an honest way in the entirety of history. In the Overcavern Forest, on the same tree Ben which was currently speaking to an Aeon slug in, was a village of forest fairies. They were considered by all the other fairy villages to be completely out of their minds crazy. It was famous, in fact, among the entire forest for the outrageous behaviors exhibited by its inhabitants. It was also the only place in the forest that accepted exiled fae, which added to its reputation. The strangest thing about them, aside from everything else a chatty gossip of a forest fairy might tell someone, was that they kept adding to the size of their village. Fairies followed a natural order which closely resembled the hive-like nature of the honeybee. They would grow, gather resources, build a village like every other fairy village, reproduce with one another, and when their numbers grew too large, they would swarm, and half of the village would leave to establish a new village. But Strangetown, as it was called by the other fairies, did not swarm and split. They instead just continued building their village bigger and bigger until it wasn't a village anymore. It was a town. In fact, their rampant breeding and their recent acquisition of omnivore meant they were growing at an unprecedented rate. They were about to have an official, sanctioned by the system city, complete with the option to purchase a city crystal, because it would be the first fairy city anywhere. Ever. The city crystal would be only the 8th in the world. Yes, things were getting a little strange in Strangetown. The Fae were swarming creatures. They worked in concert with one another. Few of them even had names, going their entire lives without ever being referred to as an individual. They didn't mind it at all, and having a name was something of an annoyance because then it meant someone could ask them specifically to do something. Names and distinct identities in general were a responsibility, which Fae in general loathed, and were foisted on some unlucky fairy who had to be the village chief and make decisions. In Strangetown, Almost all of them had names, which they'd given to themselves. Completely insane, the chatty little fairy gossip might say, looking over her shoulder and giving someone a knowing look. I'd sooner lose a wing than name myself, she would go on, then probably get bored with talking and resume throwing rocks at creatures that couldn't catch her easily. In the burgeoning, bursting at the seams, strange town, the Fae were starting to come into conflict with one another, something that rarely happened among the swarming fairies. They were starting to fight amongst themselves, and any outsider could see their whole settlement was on the verge of total collapse. It would be a civil war, and a black mark on the collective memory of the fairy, a story they told their little, cute, bug-like babies about why names were bad. They would rip each other to shreds to the last and destroy everything, consumed by madness and grief at the wrongness of their existence, and nothing would remain except a patch of forest the Fae avoided flying in. They wouldn't want to remember that place, but they would never be able to forget.
"They're going to destroy my home!"
the Aeon slug cried to Ben, real tears running from his enormous, beautiful eyes and down his stalks.
"Please, you've got to do something. If you do, I'll give you the quest. The one only my kind can grant. Aeon slugs are older than the system and lived in this place long before he arrived and struck the bargain that made the world his. We have special privileges and rights, and one of our sworn duties is to administer the quest."
"What's the quest?" Ben asked, leaning on his fist, intentionally not capitalizing the term.
"What's the quest? It's the quest to beat the world, Ben! It's the whole point of this game! The way out of here, the way to win!"
"Oh," Ben said, eyes wide. "The quest!
Yes! The great adventure! That which proved those who left this place were worthy of the power they would obtain here. It is given to few, but if you help me, I will join with you, and I will be your guide."
He paused, taking a deep, sluggy breath.
"Ben? Will you help me?"